He's out on bail after being accused of defamation. The man who he has allegedly defamed, Afe Babalola, is himself a senior lawyer, and Dele, in his latest book, accuses him of corruption, and he doesn't stop there. Dele accuses the entire Nigerian justice system of being rotten from top to bottom. The book, Nigeria and Its Criminal Justice System, has been banned by the authorities, but since his arrest, its sales have skyrocketed. Now, geography matters in this case. Dele is in Lagos, but he was arrested, he says abducted, and driven hundreds of kilometres away to a city where defamation is a more serious offence. So what does Dele Farotimi's case tell us about Nigeria today? To unpick this complex but important story, I was joined by Patrick Smith, editor of Africa Confidential, and Donu Kogbara, writer, broadcaster and commentator who's in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. You're in Lagos, Dele, is that right?
Yes, I am.
Welcome to Africa Here and Now. Now, as I understand it, I'm not a lawyer, but we can't go into the details of the legal charges that have been levelled against you for fear of breaching sub judice rules. But we can ask you why you think you ended up in jail with a slew of defamation allegations against you.
Let's just say that I didn't expect the subjects of my book to embrace me and smoke the peace pipe and sing Kumbaya. I always expected that there would be reaction.
This is the book, by the way. It's called Nigeria and Its Criminal Justice System. You obviously offended some people, if not a single person. As I say, we can't go into the details of that, but it was the offence, apparently, in this book that got you into trouble. Was that right?
Yes. It is the events recorded in the book that offended the principalities and powers in my country. Let's just put it that way. The things I had to say in the book, the events I recorded for posterity in the book, the totality of the offenses I am alleged to have caused and the crimes I'm supposed to have committed are encapsulated right there in the book. That's what it's all about, nothing more.
And you were detained for about 3 weeks. That seemed to have had a fairly overwhelming effect on you. I looked at some videos you made shortly after your release, and it seemed you seemed completely and profoundly moved by what had happened to you.
Let's say that, number one, the word detained in Nigerian lexicon speaks to the military era, where an individual could summarily, at his pleasure, have somebody detained. Now, I said somebody, I didn't use the word citizen. You can't detain a citizen because citizenship it presumes the rule of law if you're talking citizenship. So in the days of the military, because we could not be citizens since we were not governed by law, it was all right for somebody to summarily detain a person. In this case, I would prefer that we use the word imprisoned, because a process that advertises itself as being lawful had me remanded in prison custody. Now, the legality of that process will become the subject of litigations in the coming days, because it is my contention that the law did not apply in my imprisonment. I was imprisoned without the due process of the law. I was abducted from my office in Lagos. Policemen crossed 5 state lines from Ekiti to come to Lagos to abduct me in my office. These policemen picked me up and took me in company of a private security person who works for Mr. Afe Babalola. They abducted me from my office and hauled me before a magistrate on a charge that is unknown to law in Ekiti State. And I was sent to prison on account of that.
Could we explain who Afe Babalola is?
He's just another lawyer. He's one of our most revered senior advocates, one of the doyens of the legal profession in Nigeria. That's who he is. Just another individual as myself.
Well, he's quite a big name, a big personality. Most famous for giving £10 million to King's College London. It's a donation for students, African students who want to study human rights.
Dele, your ordeal has been described as the weaponization of the legal system against dissent. You presumably would agree with that. And this action was taken, I guess you would propose, in order to shut you up, really, because the person in question didn't like what you said about him.
You know, in law, we have a Latin maxim, and I would say that and allow it to suffice as an answer to your question, since I don't want to fall foul of the rule that would guard me from speaking to the case. In Latin, we will say res ipsa loquitur. The facts speak eloquently for themselves. All I have done is to write a book. I might very well be wrong. Let's imagine that I am. Surely there must be a process allowed by law for dealing with errant, foolish writers who would dare to defame legal titans or even a mechanic. It wouldn't matter who I've defamed. The truth of the matter is that a legal system works on the presumption that there must be justice for the aggrieved, justice for the accused, and justice for the society. So surely this cannot be the way the Nigerian state is structured to deal with those with whom we disagree. I met better men than myself in prison. People who have no business being there, that are there. A society tells you how far it has walked on the journey to civilization by how it treats its wicked. I saw the way the Nigerian state treats its wicked, the prisoners. So I am thankful for my time there.
So, Dele, putting this current case aside, this is the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. You've actually been making trouble for the authorities for quite a long time now. For how long have you been an activist? Highly vocal activist?
In Nigeria, the word activist is one that I try to run away from. I like thinking that I'm simply another victim of Nigeria who is unwilling to accept his victimhood and would always fight to demand that I be treated as the citizen that the system pretends that I am. So I think I came to the knowledge of the loss of my citizenship, or perhaps, maybe properly put, the illusion of my citizenship when I was 16 years old. By the time I was 16 years old, I had an episode with the Nigerian state as represented by the Nigerian police, where I was succinctly reminded of the fact that I wasn't governed by law, but by the whims and caprices of men. And from that time, I'd always known that I was never going to be accepting of this.
You're now in your 50s, so that's 40 years. Yes, but just for 40 years. But what I would like to point out is that, which I find interesting, is that the alleged offense for which you were locked up is pretty mild compared to some of the things you've said against the system. Particularly, it's not just this government. It's not just this eminent legal luminary. You have actually been protesting for a long time about the many things that are wrong with the country and the system.
Well, let me put it this way. And this is what I've told people who have attempted to situate Tinubu within the context of my current experiences. I'm not new in the consciousness of the average Nigerian, but I think those who have initiated this round of battle grossly underestimated the person they came up against. They thought I was the average Nigerian. But the problem is that I am a victim who is aware of my victimhood. And I've been protesting on behalf of victims in Nigeria for a long time. So it was easy for the other victims to find their voices in demanding my release. It was a vicarious battle that they fought for themselves. They were not just fighting for me, they were also fighting for themselves. So it was a battle that those who picked me up did not expect. I've suffered persecution on multiple levels from the state and the system, but it had never come into the public glare. I didn't bring it into the public glare. I fought in my private space. This was just a situation where the system or principalities within the system overplayed their hand. This is what happens to the average Nigerian every day. Mine just happened to be one of those cases where the average Nigerian found his voice. That's the only thing that happened.
So, Dele, the situation as you describe it sounds quite intimidating, actually. How would you assess the space in Nigeria for freedom of expression and compare that, if you would, to previous phases of Nigeria's independence? You've obviously lived through several military regimes.
Well, let me just say that, unfortunately for the Nigerian, our situation has not changed throughout my own lifetime. What has happened is that the temperament of those in power and the readiness and tolerance of the victim has determined to a very large extent the relationship between Nigerians and those who have ruined our country. Obasanjo is probably the most intelligent of the lot that has ruled Nigeria, but he is not in any way much different in temperament or tolerance for dissent as the current ones that have occupied the office in recent times. Their pretensions and delusions might differ, but the preoccupation of the men of power in Nigeria have never been different. They just want to keep the people supine while they continue to plunder the treasury and really do nothing for the people. Whether it's been the military or it's been the succession of bandits who have called themselves politicians, the reality is that the Nigerian situation has not changed. The Nigerian has never been governed by law. If a place is not governed by law, but is governed by the temperament, whims, and caprices of men, it simply means that that space is governed by impunity.
Dele, how do you go about changing this? Is it just down to the politicians, or why don't the lawyers take it on?
No. The change must begin with those who should be citizens but aren't. I have been in the national consciousness for about a decade now, and the totality of my role in that space has been to awaken the consciousness of the people to the point where they realize that if Nigeria is going to be rescued, it will be because they, not the government, not the politicians, not Britain, not the US, not China. It will be because Nigerians found the grace to become. The biggest problem with Nigeria is that it is a country without citizens. When you don't have citizens in a country, you cannot demand patriotism of persons who are not citizens. So what we have, first of all, is a country that needs to be bettered first. The Nigerians have to have an understanding of the fact that this is their homeland. So they need to own it. It is when they own it that they will demand better, both of themselves and of their ruiners. We are the problem, but we are also the solution. Looking to our politicians for help or for change is a waste of time.
You're a great believer in the people, the power of the people, which you feel is dormant, hasn't really been unleashed. Why do you think Nigerians are so complacent, cowardly even?
I think that's a misstatement of the Nigerian reality. The unfortunate reality of the Nigerian is that we are all victims. But we almost always find ourselves victimized and divided by those who could show us the commonalities of our affliction. They divide us behind ethnicity, they divide us behind religion, they divide us behind the most stupid things in the world. Those who rule Nigeria deliberately divide Nigerians along multiple fault lines. So when you have a situation where the Nigerian is constantly divided, it becomes next to impossible to unite them behind common purposes. And when they cannot be united behind common purposes, it becomes easy for them to become long-suffering, not necessarily because they cannot fight, but because they've been divided. So when something happens to someone who happens to be from a different ethnic background, it's okay. You legitimize the evil because it's not one of yours.
Well, that didn't happen with you, Dele. Let me stop you right there. That didn't happen with you.
Because I had been deliberate over the course of my life in Nigeria to make clear that the ethno-religious fault lines are irrelevant to your victimhood as a Nigerian. All they merely did was to provide a platform by which Nigerians could find validation for the arguments that had been raising for a long time. The person who initiated my victimization is a Yoruba man just like myself. If he were to be an Igbo person or a Fulani person or an Hausa person or an Ijaw person, they would have found a way to couch this in ethno-religious terms. But the only thing that unites Nigerians without equivocation is our common victimhood. So I had a situation where what I had been preaching and shouting about for years was playing out in public glare. So that it didn't happen to me, that was what brought me to tears. The realization that the Nigerian has actually begun to find themselves. They started finding themselves because in speaking for me, I became a composite. The problem with Nigeria is that we've never identified whom the Nigerian is because we have multiple divisions of the Nigerian. But in me, it became easier for a lot of people to find themselves. I was a victim of the system against which I had railed for years. And what I had been complaining about was being done in full glare. That's what it was.
When you were in custody, a lot of people were, well, not a lot, some people were saying that we should go and beg Afe Babalola, the man who put you in behind bars. Because, you know, he's an elderly person, and here we have worship, what I call elder worship. So some people felt we should just go and beg the old man to let you go. And indeed, that was the approach that some people took. But when I spoke to you a few days later, shortly after your release, you made it very clear to me that you did not appreciate people begging on your behalf. How long? I know this is a silly question in some ways. How long would you have been willing to stay in prison?
Well, put it this way. I did tell my wife, my lawyers, and a lot of my friends, in fact, everybody who came visiting at H0t prison, I told them very clearly that I didn't expect to come out until February. I knew that the system wouldn't be able to keep me beyond February because I knew I hadn't done anything to have deserved my abduction in the first place. But I had figured that the system might be obdurate and that it might take running through the entire system before I would be released. I did not, in good conscience, expect the level of support that Nigerians show behind me. And I'll tell you straight up, without the level of support that the average Nigerian across the ethno-religious divide show behind me, the demand for my release, the demand that the system should work properly and lawfully, I would have actually remained there until February. That I came out as early as I did is a testament to the willingness of the average Nigerian to speak for me. That was what overwhelmed me when I started weeping during my Sunday broadcast. But to be frank with you, I was prepared to be there until February. That was my expectation.
And the picture you've painted of Nigeria today, Dele, is a pretty bleak one. But the rallying behind your cause seems to have given you at least some cause for optimism. Do you maintain that a new Nigeria is still possible?
Oh, I'll die the day I stop believing in that. I live in the hope that we can birth a Nigeria that our children can be proud of. I live in that hope. If I gave up on that hope, I'd flee Nigeria like other members of my generation and economic class. The average Nigerian middle class person is either fleeing, planning to flee, or has fled. That is a class that has more or less disappeared. I live in the hope and faith and believe that it is possible to birth a Nigeria that can be a first world country in a couple of generations, because we have both the human and material resources to get it done. So yeah,